Strike it. Burn the feed trough to the ground, and then we will see whether that widow signs Pine Ridge over." Jace's voice cut through the blizzard like a knife across bone. The match trembled in his hand, its orange flame only inches from the ranch's last stack of dry hay. A few steps away, Cora pressed her teeth into her lower lip until she tasted blood. If the fire caught, the cattle would have nothing left to eat. By spring, the herd would be dead, and the final piece of land that still held her family's warmth would belong to the men tightening their claim around it. This was winter frontier survival stripped to its hardest truth. A roof meant little if the animals beneath it starved. The match never reached the hay. A scarred hand came out of the darkness and closed around the flame. Holt, the silent hired man who lowered his eyes and kept his distance, crushed the burning head between his bare fingers without flinching. Jace barely had time to stare before Holt seized his wrist and twisted. Bone snapped. The pistol dropped into the snow. The movement tore open Jace's leather sleeve, exposing a blackened cross branded deep into his left wrist. Holt stopped. The violence in him vanished so suddenly that even Cora saw the change. His gray eyes fixed on the mark, as though the storm, the ranch, and the wounded young man had fallen away. That scar belonged to something buried 15 years earlier. Something Holt had crossed half a lifetime trying to escape. Jace collapsed into the snow, clutching his broken arm. Even through the pain, a savage smile spread across his face. He was no longer looking at an aging ranch hand. He was looking at the man beneath the disguise. By protecting Cora's home, Holt had destroyed the silence that had kept him alive for 15 years. The wind closed around Pine Ridge again. What had begun as a desperate widow ranch story had opened into something darker. The first wound in a Western redemption story that could only be settled in blood. Inside Pine Ridge, Mercy worked with steady hands, while an old name reopened a wound no bandage could reach. The wind clawed at the kitchen windows, but the silence inside felt heavier than the storm. Cora stood beside the table with a strip of cloth torn from an old shirt. Her hands were rough from years of cold mornings, broken fencing, and work that had never waited for grief to pass. Without trembling or asking permission, she set Jace's shattered arm and bound it tight. He bit down until blood marked his teeth. Hatred burned in his eyes as he stared toward the darkest corner of the room. Holt stood there with one shoulder against the wall, trying to make himself smaller than his own shadow. The same hand that had broken Jace's arm now held a black iron coffee pot, as though it were the only ordinary thing left in his life. "Where did you come from?" Cora asked. "Who sends a boy to burn the winter feed of a widow?" Jace spat blood onto the floorboards. "You should be worrying about your life. My father does not leave behind anything he has chosen to take." "What is his name?" "Thorne." The coffee pot stopped in Holt's hand. A dark stream spilled over the rim and spread across the scarred table. He did not wipe it away. The name had already reached deeper than heat, calling up every body he had tried to bury during 15 years of silence. This was no longer only a widow ranch story. It had become an Old West revenge story, waiting for its target to step into the open. Thorne knew where Holt had hidden, and the branded mark on Jace's wrist proved that the past had found Pine Ridge. By nightfall, Holt was in the stable. He lifted his worn saddle and loosened the reins with the quick, practiced movements of a man who had survived by leaving before anyone could ask him to stay. The instinct was older than loyalty and stronger than shame. Ride into the storm. Disappear again. He pushed open the heavy door. Cora stood outside in the blowing snow, her hair torn loose by the wind. A long rifle rested in her hands, freshly loaded. She did not point it at him. She did not need to. Her eyes held him where the rifle could not, turning his escape into the first true test of his Western redemption story. At the stable door, the blizzard roared like a wounded animal. Snow struck Holt and Cora in hard, slanting sheets while the open darkness waited behind him. Cora lowered the rifle until its barrel pointed at the frozen ground. She did not step aside. "I do not care who you were," she said. Her voice sounded tired, scraped raw by cold and years of endurance, but it did not shake. "I do not need to know what those men want from you." She glanced toward the ranch house, but Pine Ridge is dying. That boy was right. They will leave nothing standing. If you ride away tonight, I will be burying myself beside the cattle before winter is over. Holt tightened his grip on the reins. Every instinct that had kept him alive for 15 years urged him to move past her, mount the horse, and vanish before dawn exposed his trail. Then Cora reached for him. Her hand was red with cold, the skin roughened by rope, frost, and work. She placed it against his worn leather sleeve, not with tenderness, and not as a plea. It was the touch of one cornered survivor making terms with another. "Stay through the winter," she said, "or leave me and the herd to freeze." For a long moment, Holt looked at her hand. Then he looked beyond her into the white darkness, where every road promised the same lonely escape. Cora did not ask Holt to save her. She asked him to choose whether he would keep running while Pine Ridge died behind him. Morning came pale and thin through the cracks in the ranch house walls. Jace woke with pain hammering through his broken arm. He dragged himself to the window and stared into the yard. His horse was gone. In the snow below, the steady blow of an axe split the silence. Holt stood beside a pile of cut timber, working as though he had always belonged there. At his feet lay an opened canvas bundle. Inside rested a cold revolver that had slept at the bottom of a trunk for 15 years. The man who had survived by leaving had chosen to stay. His decision turned Pine Ridge into more than a struggle for winter survival. It became the beginning of his gunslinger redemption. The blizzard eased before noon, leaving behind a cold sharp enough to split breath in the lungs. Around Pine Ridge, the pines stood black and still beneath their burden of snow. Thorne's men did not charge the ranch. They worked at its edges instead, weakening it piece by piece. The water trough fed from the creek had been smashed open, and a section of the western wolf fence lay torn across the drifts. Holt followed the damage without speaking. His gray eyes moved from hoofprint to broken timber, from the frozen creek bank to the shadows beneath the trees. The man who had spent 15 years avoiding trouble now studied the land as though every mark carried a warning. Near the creek, unfamiliar tracks crossed one another in deliberate circles. They were not hiding their presence. Thorne had not come only for Holt. He meant to starve Pine Ridge, break Cora's claim, and leave the ranch too ruined to survive the winter. 2 scouts waited behind a granite outcrop with rifles across their knees. They had chosen a good position, but they had mistaken silence for safety. Holt did not draw his revolver. A gunshot would carry through the timber and announce his position to every rider nearby. He disappeared between the pines. A rope hissed through the cold air. The loop caught the first scout around the throat and jerked him backward before he could call out. The second man turned, lifting his rifle, but Holt's boot struck the barrel aside. One blow from the revolver's grip dropped him into the snow. The forest became quiet again. By dusk, Holt dragged both men into the yard with their wrists and ankles bound. Blood marked the snow beneath one man's temple, dark against the white. From behind the iced kitchen window, Jace watched Holt leave them near the porch. His broken arm rested against his chest, but a bitter laugh escaped him. He looked at Cora. "You have an old wolf living under your roof," he said, "and you keep treating him like a sheepdog." Then he nodded toward Holt's motionless figure. "That man killed my uncle 15 years ago at the Brazos." The struggle for Pine Ridge had become more than a ranch under siege. It was now an Old West revenge that had finally found its target. The parlor fell silent after Jace's accusation. Holt crossed the threshold and brushed snow from his shoulders. He did not deny the charge. He did not ask Cora to believe him. The Brazos 15 years ago was blood and confusion, he said. His voice sounded like dry timber under a saw. Men fired blind in the dark. Your Uncle Thomas fell to a bullet no one could name. Jace stared at him. The pain in his broken arm seemed to recede beneath a harder wound. Piece by piece, the purpose of his journey became clear. Thorne had not sent him to collect a debt or frighten a widow into surrendering her land. He had known Holt was hiding at Pine Ridge. He had sent his own son forward to force the old gunman into the open. Jace had not been trusted with a mission. He had been used as bait. The knowledge settled across his pale face, stripping away the confidence he had carried into the ranch. Holt turned toward Cora. For the first time, regret showed plainly in his eyes. I do not know whether the bullet that struck Thomas came from my gun, he said. That is the truth. Not knowing was enough to make me run. He waited for Cora to step back. She did not. Instead, she bent, lifted a split piece of firewood, and placed it in the stove. Sparks rose between them. Everyone on the frontier carries a body inside them, she said. What matters is what you choose to do with those blood-stained hands tomorrow. For 15 years, Holt had expected judgment. Cora gave him a choice. That moment became the quiet center of their frontier survival romance. Not because either spoke of love, but because she saw the worst truth in him and refused to reduce him to it. Then an explosion shattered the night. The windows rattled. All three turned toward the yard. On the western slope, the winter hay barn had become a towering flame. Red light swept across the snow and the frozen roofs of Pine Ridge. The ranch under siege had entered its final stage. Thorne had arrived. Fire turned the snow red, and the man who had spent 15 years hiding finally stepped into the open. The hay barn burned high on the western slope, throwing a savage glow across Pine Ridge. At the foot of the hill, 6 riders emerged through the freezing haze. Thorne sat on a broad black horse at the center of them. 5 armed men formed a line beside him, silent and patient, their rifles resting across their saddles. Holt stepped onto the porch, the quiet hired hand who had kept his head lowered and his past buried, was gone. There was no disguise left to protect him, and no road remained that did not pass through blood. If he surrendered, Thorne would still destroy the ranch. The man had not ridden through a winter storm for mercy. He had come to finish an Old West revenge that had consumed 15 years of his life. If Holt fought, Pine Ridge would pay beside him. He removed his worn leather work apron and dropped it onto the iced steps. Then he fastened the gun belt low on his right hip. Every movement was measured, smooth, and familiar. The discipline of a man returning to a life he had once sworn never to touch again. Firelight ran along the barrel of his revolver. This was no longer the beginning of Gunslinger redemption. It was the cost of it. Holt looked back at Cora. Go inside. Lock the door. Do not come out until this is over. Cora did not move. She worked the lever of her rifle, chambering around with a hard metallic snap. Then she stepped beside him. The 2 figures stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the burning sky. One carried the weight of old blood. The other carried the home that blood had come to destroy. Cora chose to defend Pine Ridge with Holt, knowing his enemies had already turned the ranch into a battlefield. Below them, Thorne raised his voice over the wind. Blackjack, your life belongs to me tonight. The name struck the hill like a rifle shot. Holt had not heard it spoken in 15 years. Now it tore away the last remnant of the man he had pretended to be. The ranch under siege had reached the point where neither surrender nor escape could save it. The first gunshot followed. The first bullet struck the porch post close enough to Holt's temple to shower his face with splinters. Gunfire spread across the ranch house and the frozen windmill. There was no glory in it, only darkness, shifting shadows, and the bitter smell of powder filling every breath. Holt moved with the calm precision of a man who had survived such nights before. He fired only when a target showed itself, then withdrew before Thorne's men could close around him. Cora stayed near his left side, loading her rifle with hands stained by mud and grease. Each time she raised the barrel, she did so without hesitation. The attackers kept advancing. Their greater numbers forced Holt and Cora behind the damaged wolf fence, where trampled snow had turned to freezing mud. Bullets tore through the rails above them and struck the ground at their knees. Holt looked at Cora as she pressed another cartridge into the rifle. For the first time in 15 years, he felt fear. He was not afraid of dying. He was afraid that she would be killed because of the violence he had brought to her home. A shot flashed from the dark edge of the hill. The bullet passed across Cora's shoulder, ripping through her heavy coat and throwing a bright line of blood across the snow. She gave a low cry and dropped to one knee. Holt abandoned every safe position and used his own body to shield Cora from the next volley. He reached her in 2 strides, lifted her from the ground, and carried her toward the old storage shed. Bullets struck the boards behind them as he forced the door open and pulled her inside. The door slammed shut. A burst of gunfire chewed through the outer planks. There was no rear exit, and the narrow windows offered no path through the surrounding men. Boots moved closer outside. "Give me your life, Blackjack," Thorne called through the cracks, "or I will burn both of you inside that wooden grave." A torch rose beyond the wall. Orange light spilled through the gaps, followed by the dry crackle of flame taking hold along the doorframe. The ranch under siege had become a burning trap, and Holt had nowhere left to retreat. Inside the burning storehouse, the past finally stopped hiding behind gun smoke and demanded an answer. Black smoke rolled through the cracked boards and settled low over the dirt floor. Holt dropped to one knee beside Cora, tore a strip from his shirt, and pressed it hard against the wound in her shoulder. She clenched her jaw while soot and melted snow streaked her face. Her eyes stayed on him, steady and without accusation. Outside, flames licked along the door. Thorne's laughter carried through the walls. Then it stopped. Jace staggered out of the storm, with his injured arm bound tightly against his chest. He moved between the burning doorway and his father's rifle. "You left me here to die," he said. "You sent me in first because you needed bait." His voice broke, but he did not move aside. Jace finally understood that Thorne's revenge mattered more to him than his own son's life. For the first time, Thorne hesitated. The hard lines of his face shifted beneath the firelight, revealing the exhaustion of a man who had carried hatred so long that he no longer knew what remained beneath it. The door burst outward. Holt stepped through smoke, sparks, and blowing snow. He did not take cover. He stood in the open while every rifle turned toward him. "Thomas never wanted to stay in that territory," Holt called. "He had packed for Kansas. He wanted no part of what we had become." The words struck harder than gunfire. "The Brazos was confusion and blood," Holt said. "The bullet that killed Thomas may have come from my gun. It may have come from yours. Neither of us will ever know." The truth at the center of their Old West revenge was that certainty had never existed. Thorne's pride seemed to break for one brief moment. Then the old violence returned. He let the torch fall from his hand. His fingers moved toward the revolver at his hip. Holt remained still. This was the heart of frontier justice. Not a clean verdict, but 2 ruined men deciding whether another death could repair the first. Snow hissed against the flames as Thorne closed his hand around the grip. At Pine Ridge, the final exchange of gunfire offered no clean victory, only the brutal price of frontier justice. Snow drove across the open yard, carrying black ash from the burning storehouse. Holt and Thorne stood facing each other through the smoke, 2 men held upright by anger, blood loss, and 15 years of unfinished grief. There was no shouted challenge, no quick draw shaped for legend. Their hands closed around their revolvers, with the slow inevitability of men who had repeated this moment too many times in memory. Pride no longer guided them. Neither man looked like he expected to win. They drew. 2 shots broke almost together. Thorne staggered backward. His free hand clamped over his right side as blood pushed between his fingers and fell in dark drops onto the snow. Across the yard, Holt dropped to one knee. The bullet had struck his left shoulder with enough force to turn him sideways. Blood spread beneath his worn coat, and his arm shook as he forced the revolver back toward Thorne. Neither man fell. The duel did not prove which man had fired the bullet that killed Thomas. It only created 2 more wounds in the name of an old uncertainty. Through the drifting smoke, their gun barrels remained fixed on each other's chests. Both hammers were drawn. Both trigger fingers trembled from cold and pain. Behind Holt, fire worked along the storehouse wall. Near the doorway, Cora pressed one hand to her wounded shoulder, while Jace watched his father with a face emptied of loyalty. No one called for another shot. The frozen windmill turned a fraction and stopped again, its iron joints groaning above the yard. This was the true end of their Old West revenge. Not triumph, but 2 wounded men discovering that hatred could carry them only as far as one final choice. Holt's breath came hard. Thorne swayed beneath the smoke. Still, neither lowered his weapon. For Holt, this was the last test of his gunslinger redemption. He could finish the man who had hunted him and repeat the violence that had ruled his life, or he could let the truth remain imperfect. The wind rose around Pine Ridge. 2 fingers was tightened. The night waited for a 3rd shot. Pine Ridge survived. But the final victory in this second-chance Western romance came without triumph. Only wounds, ash, and the first fragile promise of home. Only the crackle of the burning storehouse and the cry of the winter wind remained. Holt and Thorne still held their revolvers on one another, both barrels trembling from cold, blood loss, and pain. The 3rd shot never came. Thorne lowered his weapon until the muzzle pointed into the snow. It was not mercy. It was exhaustion. 15 years of carrying one dead man inside him had finally emptied what strength he had left. He looked down at the blood spreading from his side, then at Jace, the son he had been willing to sacrifice to revenge. Last, he looked at Holt. Neither man spoke. There was nothing left to defend with words. Thorne gave a slight nod. His riders lowered their rifles. He mounted the black horse with visible effort and turned toward the pine forest. The others followed him into the darkness, carrying their wounded pride and unfinished grief away from Pine Ridge. Only when they disappeared did Holt's strength fail. His revolver fell into the snow. He collapsed beside it, blood running from his shoulder into the red light of the dying fire. Cora dropped her rifle and crossed the yard. She knelt in the slush, caught Holt beneath the shoulders, and held him against her before his face could strike the frozen ground. He raised one blood-stained hand. His fingers shook as they touched hers. For 15 years, Holt had survived by withdrawing from every bond before it could become loss. This time, he did not pull away. He closed his hand around Cora's and accepted the first human connection he had not tried to escape. Pine Ridge stood broken around them. The hay was gone. The fences were damaged. Fire had scarred the buildings, and blood marked the snow. There was no celebration, only work waiting for daylight. Together, Cora and Holt rose unsteadily and moved toward the porch, supporting each other through the dark. Their frontier survival romance did not end with a promise spoken aloud. It began with 2 wounded people choosing the same doorway. Behind them, the fire settled into ash. Ahead, a home still stood. In the Wild West, there are no perfect endings, only the scars we carry, and the strength to rebuild from the ashes. Thank you for staying until the very end, to witness the harrowing night at Pine Ridge. If Holt and Cora's story of survival, sacrifice, and redemption left a mark on you, please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts. What would you have done in his boots? Please like the video and hit the subscribe button so you won't miss our next cinematic journey into the untamed frontier. Until next time, stay resilient.